Hey everyone, before we start this amazing episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast with my very special guest, Paul Levy, where we dive deep into the topic of Wetiko, I just want to make a quick announcement. We have another round coming up of our private group coaching program, Time of Transition Embodied Soul Awakening, starting August 23rd until November 2nd. Laura and I will be taking a group of 25 people on a 10-week journey where we dive deeper into the necessary inner work and outer work to do in this day and age, because there is an awakening happening. You can see it, these intense times, but we need to step up to the plate, right? So we align more to who we truly are, our essence and our deeper soul purpose for being here. So this course really consists of the necessary inner work based on the fourfold approach of holistic self-work, working on all levels: physical, emotional, psychological, intellectual, and spiritual, in context of what's happening in the world, right? The anti-divine forces and the matrix. We look deep into fringe and occult knowledge, spiritual warriorship, universal laws, reality creation, soul resonance, evolutionary relationships, and all of that. And we'll give you guys a lot of practical material, practices, exercises to do the necessary inner work, somatic work, shadow work, trauma work, in all of that. So you really come in alignment with who we truly are and step up to the spiritual warriors we're called to be during this day and age. So if you're interested, go to my website, veilofreality.com under courses, and you can find out more about it. And if you feel called, simply fill out the application and we'll get back to you with more information. With that being said, enjoy my interview with Paul Levy. All right, welcome everyone to this new episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast with your host Bernhard Guenther, and I'm a very special returning guest to this podcast. And he has been on the podcast 2 years ago, and I've promoted his work all over. It's one of the most important topics in this day and age, and I'm very looking forward to go deeper and catch up with Paul Levy. Welcome to the podcast, Paul.
Hi, yeah, I'm just so happy to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. Just I want to let people know, because I would hope and assume that most people who follow my work are aware with your work, and hope more and more people are becoming aware of your work. But just in a nutshell, Paul Levy is the author of Dispelling Wetiko, Breaking the Curse of Evil, and another book, The Quantum Revelation, A Radical Synthesis of Science and Spirituality, and the third one, Awakened by Darkness, When Evil Becomes Your Father. And he just finished editing his upcoming book, which will be released later this year. And it's a follow-up to the Wetiko book called Wetiko, Healing the Mind Virus That Plagues Our World. And that's really what we want to dive deeper into. And Paul is also the founder of the Awaken in the Dream community in Portland, Oregon. He's an artist, and he's deeply steeped in the work of Carl Gustav Jung, and has been a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner for over 30 years. His website is awakeninthedream.com. So, and I also want to thank you so much, Paul. A few weeks ago, you already sent me a manuscript of your new upcoming book before even the editing finished. And I dove into it. I read basically halfway through it already. I'm a slow reader, especially when it comes to your book, because there are not many books when I underline a lot. And with your book, I was highlighting like, yes, kind of like, taking it all in and then contemplating it. And I have to say to all viewers out there that, many people ask me always what books I recommend and all of that. And my answer usually is, I don't know you. You have to, whatever resonates with you. But your book, especially the first one, Wetiko, Dispelling the Curse of Evil, has been in my top 5 ever since you released it. And the same with this book. This is a topic that it's a necessity almost, I feel, to become aware of this multidimensional perspective of the evil we're dealing with and what we truly can do. And I love how you especially incorporate quantum physics and also Jungian psychology and all of it. So we don't keep just fighting the shadows on the wall, basically, right? Mm-hmm. And I want to open up this conversation or this interview with a quote from your upcoming book, which really touched me as well. And it goes where you write about an idea that has come to time, so to speak. When the time has come to an idea to come into the world, the idea which has a life of its own, enlists a receptive mind, be it its purveyor. These living ideas can potentially seize people and make use of them to materialize themselves into the stream of human history. Oftentimes, a new idea begins to emerge by informing and giving shape to an unconscious behavior in a group or people. And only much later is it recognized and becomes a conscious conception. In an oppositive sense, there can be maybe like bad ideas that can infect humanity through Wetiko, but Wetiko in itself is an idea that has been, as you have seen in your own research, woven through various esoteric spiritual traditions, and it's an idea that time has come, so to speak, which is very, very important to understand and apply. And I'm also very impressed when I read your work. It's like it's not only your research, but almost you're plugging into Dreamtime, and there's some sort of download happening, I feel, in your work, right? That really like synthesizes it beautiful, bringing it all together. So just to start it off with, for people who are not familiar, with your work with Wetiko just yet, can we just summarize it? What is Wetiko, and how do we see it in the world and within ourselves?
Sure. Really. Thank you. So the Wetiko idea, it's a Native American idea, and it has to do really, so it's a psychospiritual disease of the soul that we all have in potential. It pervades the collective unconscious. And it's at the root of all of the madness that we're playing out in our lives on the world stage. And it's the source of the evil that we're playing out. And keep in mind, it's not just an abstract idea or a theory or something like that. How I came to this work was this energy, the Wetiko, which is like this virus of the mind. That's a way to think of it. Like we hear about the coronavirus, well, the Wetiko is a virus of the mind. I had a direct encounter with it in my life, in the early 80s. So, long time ago. And it almost killed me, and it completely destroyed my entire family. I haven't had a family for a long time. And so it forced me to come to terms with it. And so it's this mind virus whose origin is the human psyche, but it operates through the unconscious in such a way that we entrance ourselves via the way we project. We're always projecting onto the inkblot of the world. What Wetiko does, it exploits our projective tendencies in a way where we literally hypnotize ourselves via our own projections. And so the thing about Wetiko, see, it's a quantum phenomenon. And what I mean by that is that, so it's the source of the deepest evil. And it also contains its own medicine, its own healing. But if you don't have the recognition of that, it's actually showing us, in a sense, our own creative power, because it has no creativity. The Wetiko bug, see, it's in all the spiritual traditions. They'll talk about, even in the apocryphal text of the Bible, they talk about this counterfeiting spirit. And now the counterfeiting spirit, the way they describe it, it's word for word Wetiko, but it's interesting. It got edited out of the Bible. And in my new book, I point out, that's because Wetiko was on the editorial board and made sure that, it wouldn't be exposed, because it only has power over us to the extent that we don't see it. Okay, so it operates through the unconscious, through the part of us that has like blind spots. So it's a form of psychic blindness. What that means is that as long as we are unaware of it, it can manipulate us and in a way control us and have power over us. And so many people are actually unwittingly, in a way, these instruments for the Wetiko spirit to come through. And they have no idea, because it's operating through their unconscious. They're just identified with it. They think it's who we are, that it's who they are. And the whole while there's some sort of other energy that has, in a way, really taken over them in a way that they've become possessed, so that they become the vector, they become the instrument which acts it out. Now, the thing about Wetiko, it's a psychedelic idea in that, I mean, it's very activating to the psyche. It's because its origin is in the psyche, and the means through which we try to understand it is the psyche. But what I mean particularly is that it's an inner disease of the soul that actually expresses itself through the medium of the outside world. So it's as if this inner disease of the soul somehow is able to magically extend itself out into the outer world and configure events in the world so as to express the state of a psyche that's under its thrall. Yeah. Now that's amazing, because what I'm describing is that the outer circumstance in our world is actually reflecting the inner condition of the psyche. And what does that remind us of? That's when we have dream at night. What is a dream? But it's our inner process that's actually externalized and projected out, and then we don't realize it, and then we actually become entranced by our own psyche, thinking we're experiencing an objective separate universe, but it's actually we're inside of our psyche. Yeah. So one of the ways to begin to recognize Wetiko is to begin to see the dreamlike nature. And that, when we begin to see that, all of a sudden our identity, you see, the thing, if I could just say one more thing about Wetiko, because there are so many, I mean, that's why I'm writing book after book after book about it, because it's so mind-blowing, it's so profound. Yeah. What this counterfeiting spirit does, it impersonates us. It puts us on. So it has no creativity, but it can it can plug into our creativity and turn it against us. So it impersonates us, and it'll offer us this version of ourselves, this limited version of ourselves. Oh, I'm wounded, I'm traumatized, my abuse, whatever. And then if we're not awake in that moment, we then identify with its version of ourselves. So in a way, it puts us on, and putting us on has a double meaning, like putting us on like a suit of clothes, but it tricks us, it fools us because it's a trickster. But then as soon as we identify with its version, its smaller, limited version of ourselves, then all of a sudden we're a goner, because then we've actually, it can't steal our soul, but it tricks us into giving it away. Yeah. So then we've given away ourselves, we've identified with who we're not, that's a recipe for madness. And then we've fallen under the spell of Wetiko. And basically we've entranced ourselves by the projective tendencies of our own mind. And so that's just a simple thumbnail sketch of a thing that's so multidimensional and so trippy. But I'll just stop there.
No. Excellent. Yeah. No, but it really I want to quote another excerpt from your upcoming book, because it's really so hard to spot. Like you said, it's like a counterfeit spirit, you know what I mean? In a sense. Yeah. So it and uses us in many other ways. It uses our creativity to work through us. And we, people who know familiar with my work know that we can be used, as Sri Aurobindo talked about, the occult hostile forces, right? Which you have a whole chapter as well, the anti-divine forces, right? Right. And it can even resemble light, like Satan most often appears as an angel of light, as it's even written in the Bible. So it's not this like Hollywood version of like a demon all the time. What you wrote here is really fascinating, what mirrors what you just said. One of the reasons Wetiko is so hard to pin down is that it has multiple channels of operation, both covert and overt, inner and outer, and everywhere in between. Wetiko simultaneously operates interpersonally within our own mind, interpersonally through our relationships, and transpersonally through the collective world events. Each of these, our individual, relational, and collective processes, are internested iterations of a deeper fractal, which is to say that these different dimensions of our experience are actually indivisible, interconnected, and interreflective of each other. All of these multidimensional processes are informed by Wetiko in different yet similar ways. And I think this is very important to understand, especially in this day and age, which we see now what's happening in the world, like almost very overt evil, and cracking down on us. And it's easy, on some level, we need to stand up against the corruption, speaking out and all of that, and some maybe activism. But at the same time, we must not forget this interconnectiveness, right? And I think that the disease of the psyche, what we're seeing out there, the darkness out externally, is also a mirror of our unconscious own inner darkness, in the sense, right? And that's where you also you beautifully tie this whole Wetiko disease into Jungian psychology, right?
Yeah,
To
yeah,
really
yeah.
like what we see right now is like the darkness being made conscious in the outer world because we have ignored it within ourselves. So my question is, the ultimate old question of what is evil
Yeah,
in a
yeah,
sense,
yeah.
right? And its role, because as you explained, there's a certain paradox, as all of us have experienced when we really sincerely in this process of awakening, like you said, Wetiko is the disease, but the treatment at the same time, or it's, it helps us to awaken at the same time.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what is evil in light of Wetiko and in light of Jungian psychology?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, the thing, just to create context for it, so how I first came to this work was, like I had suggested, I had a direct encounter with evil. And it wasn't just personal evil, but it was archetypal evil. And, that's the force that had changed the whole trajectory of my life. So I just want to say that because I'm not talking as like an intellectual or a scholar or, philosopher. No, I'm talking out of my own direct experience. And so it's really helpful to understand. You see, there are people who, I don't want to think about evil. That's feeding it. That's empowering it. I just want to think good thoughts and identify with the light. And I point out, well, but by doing that, you're unwittingly feeding the very evil that you're avoiding. Because the thing about the Wetiko psychosis, because it's a collective psychosis, is that it feeds off of us not looking at something. So the thing about evil, it's really, it's not a simple, thing to contemplate, because if we too directly, look at it, like the myths say, we turn to stone, we become petrified, and then we become rigidified and traumatized, and then we're no good. So we have to see it in a certain way. But here's the thing. So if we avoid evil, like I'm saying, that's, and a lot of new age spiritual people, even good people, well-intentioned, I don't want to put my attention there, and then they're unwittingly feeding it. You see, it's important. Jung talks about how profoundly important it is to have an imagination for evil. We have to cultivate an imagination for evil, because if we don't do that, the typical healthy, normal person can't even conceive of what people who are taken over by Wetiko would actually do to get power. And because they don't see that, they're way more potentially open to being victims of that. So the idea is you have to really, shed light on the darkness. And the darkness, there's like the personal dimension, the personal shadow. Then there's the archetypal dimension. That's the dimension that fairy tales and mythology talk about. They're really pointing at, this archetypal level of evil. But it's very, very tricky, because it's such a traumatizing experience that it's so easy because I'm still in trauma around, like I said, I had a direct encounter with evil. It's not just like, I went to therapy and I, danced around and did some writing and now I'm all healed. No, it absolutely I've been scarred by the experience, but I was able to not split and not dissociate. At least, at first I did, you have to, but then sort of shamanically, I was able to remember and to retrieve all the, or a lot of the lost parts of my soul that had gotten, just sort of fragmented, because it's a disintegrating energy as compared to integrating. Right. It disintegrates us. Okay. So it's a form of trauma. But the point is that what I'm really a spokesperson for is that if we don't get just totally destroyed by the experience. And so for me, I was continually cultivating, keeping my heart open and taking notes and drawing maps and cultivating awareness. I was more and more able to see that my encounter with evil, it actually was like teaching me something, that something was being revealed to me that actually helped me as far as my own awakening and my own creative process. And that, I think, is an important idea, that there's a way of encountering the dark, whether, you call it Watiko or evil or whatever it is, however you would characterize it, that actually helps us to deepen our compassion, to ignite our creativity, and to actually get a deeper sense of who we are. So, let me just stop there, but I'm happy, because it's something, my friends joke about it, but it's like my favorite topic, cultivating, contemplating evil. It's like, because it's such an incredible, if you contemplate it in a certain way, it can really activate your awakening. Let's put it that way.
No, that's excellent. Let's stay on this topic, because I think it's very important. And you said rightly so. There's a lot of pop spiritual New Age teachings that tell you just focus on the light, ignore the dark, because of some sort of the oversimplified application of quantum physics. If you focus on it, you create it right away in all these distortions, right? But when we keep an eye from it, and that's, I think, a lot of these teachings, as you mentioned, even stuff haven't been taken out of the Bible, have been distorted on purpose to let evil go its way. You know what I mean? So we have to understand that as well. But it's really fascinating this day and age, because what's happening, and you wrote this before, that, if people who are under the thrall of Wetiko, you cannot reason with people. That's why we can, even in this day and age, so many people are almost like frustrated. I see my friends and others, why people cannot see the deception and all of that, because you cannot reach people by information and facts alone. It's not possible. You cannot reason if somebody's taken over by Wetiko, right? And like, you're right. First of all, the entry point is not only blind spots, but there, traumas, wounds, conditioning, all of that. That's where these forces, this Wetiko tags into and then takes over, right? But, the question is, why do people keep a blind eye on evil? So on one hand is because they deny evil because of the New Age pop spiritual teachings. And other, like you just said, they cannot even conceive of it. They cannot recognize it. Would you fair to say that it's only possible to truly see evil in the world, what's operating, if you're more in touch with your own inner darkness, if you contemplate your evil, your own potential for evil, basically, right?
Yeah. That's key. What you just said is really key. To the extent that any of us is really doing our work and really in touch with our potentiality for evil. And I'm not just talking the personal shadow, but the archetypal shadow, and see, oh my God, who hasn't acted out their unconscious? We all have, but the idea being that to see that potentiality for evil in us, that when we really get that and own that to whatever degree we do, that empowers us to be able to see the evil in the world. And you see, one thing I want to go back to, though, one of why it's so hard for people to see evil is that, for example, to the extent that we've bought into the system, we're all we're complicit with the evil that's playing out, or in a family system, if there's somebody who's playing the role of the abuser. Right. And, and I'm not conflating them as being evil. it's a role, but it's an energy that's coming through them. They're the instrument to have that evil energy come into the field. And typically the family, configures to protect the abuser, to turn the blind eye towards the abuse and all that. And then when the person who's seeing it, and I'm talking, I was this person in my family, so I'm talking from my own experience, when the person is trying to shed light on the evil, typically the whole family system, and think of the family system as, our species, they protect the abuser because it's traumatizing to see the evil, because then you have to realize, oh, I was in collusion with it. And that's like such a traumatizing experience that people would rather choose to turn the blind eye and to demonize the whistleblower, as compared to dealing with that level of pain that's entailed from the trauma of recognizing, oh my God, I was in bed with evil. I was unwittingly, with the best of intentions, colluding with evil.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. It's the ultimate cognitive dissonance, basically, protecting themselves from the ultimate disillusionment and facing the lies they've been feeding and believing, I mean? Or even the unconscious guilt that may come up. Oh my God, what have I done? I've been complicit all along.
Exactly. It's all of those things. It's the unconscious guilt. It's the trauma. It's like facing the lies that we've believed and that we've been like perpetrating on people. Yeah.
It's fascinating because it's so fascinating to watch it. People go like, and you wrote this explicitly in your first book on Wetiko as well, that people go along with an agenda that is ultimately, from an objective, reasonable perspective, against their best interest. The ultimate Stockholm syndrome. That's really how Wetiko works, right?
Yeah. No, people under, it's so trippy. People under the spell of Wetiko, they will. So on the one hand, for one characteristic, they'll accuse people of doing the very thing that they're unconsciously doing. So that's one of the features. One other feature is that, you act out in a way that's against your best interest. And that's where, like, the thing about Wetiko, it underlies, like, when people have an addiction or, trauma, because think about addiction. You have an awareness before you act out. Oh, this is, I'm going to be sorry when I do this, but then you do it for the immediate rush or whatever reason. And then afterwards, it's like, wow, I feel all, screwed up and unhappy and all that. And there's no one else who did that. You did that to yourself. So it's as if your own creative energy, instead of creating something constructive that's in service to you, it's actually getting turned against yourself in a way that's killing you. And that's getting played out writ large on the world stage, because our species, we're enacting collective suicide. I mean, the Wetiko epidemic is a collective psychosis. We are killing ourselves. And it blows me away that it's not just on the headlines of every, paper every day, pointing at, wow, how come we're doing that?
Yeah. No, that's the fast. It's becoming more and more obvious in this sense, and I see right now, as we touched upon in the beginning, there are more and more people falling into the psychosis, becoming agents of Wetiko, right? Being hijacked. And you said it beautifully. We see it in all the esoteric occult traditions as well. These occult forces, these archonic forces, Wetiko, whatever you may want to call it, they don't have any creativity themselves. They need to hijack our own creative potential. And you made a really important point there. We become possessed this vessel for this Wetiko virus and use our creativity against us. That's literally what's happening, right? And the only way we need to regain our creativity, which means to connect to our true self, who we truly are, our God-given spirit, right? Which is behind all the armor of our trauma, our wounds, our shadow aspect, and all of that, because that's where Wetiko tags into. Like my wife and I, we call right now what's been happening in the world like a trauma installment program, right? Of the so-called matrix, right? Because the matrix operates on the fear frequency. It's always this projected fear, which gives these open gates for Wetiko to come in and take people over into this mass psychosis. Right?
Yeah. Could I just say one, because what we're talking about is this is so important. So one way to express what you just said, Bernhard, is that we are these creative beings. We have this immense creative agency and power. But to the extent that we're asleep or under the spell of Wetiko, we don't know that. And here's an example. So say if you're at night, you're sleeping in this dream, you're having a dream, and whatever point of view you're holding in the dream is instantaneously the experience of the dream is just instantaneously reflecting whatever perspective you're holding, because the dream is nothing other than your own mind. Right? So say you're holding a viewpoint, whatever the viewpoint is, and then the dream, will supply all the evidence confirming your viewpoint. So then you have all the evidence that you need. Oh, well, my viewpoint is correct because, I have all the proof I need. So then you become even more entrenched in that viewpoint. And the more entrenched you become, the more the dream will just offer you even more evidence confirming the objective truth of your viewpoint ad infinitum. It's a feedback loop. That self-perpetuates, where you will literally hypnotize yourselves thinking that your perception of what you're seeing in that dream objectively exists and is actually that you're seeing what's accurately there. But the point is, your creative power, that's the source of the dream, that's the dreamer of the dream, is actually turning against itself in a way that you're hypnotizing yourself via your own creative power. And that, in essence, is one way of describing the Wetiko virus, is that it somehow plugs into our the incredible power we have to create our experience moment by moment. Mm-hmm. But it somehow, to the extent we're not, kind of in a way connected, consciously connected with that creative agency, it gets turned against us in a way that's killing us. But here's the thing, the Wetiko, I don't want people hearing this to get afraid, going, oh, Wetiko sounds really scary and it's, going to kill us or whatever, because Wetiko doesn't even exist. There's no such thing as Wetiko. It has no independent existence at all because it's not separate from our own consciousness. Right. Okay. It like this, it just doesn't exist intrinsically, independently, and yet it can kill us. You see, that's the paradox, because that's pointing at that we have this incredible, you see, the source of, all of the crises, every single one, the very root source of the solution, for the solution and for the problem, but for the solution is for us to tap into our creative agency. And to the extent we're not doing that, and it's just like a dream, if you're not connected with your creative power in a dream, well, what are you're going to dream up dreams where like the powers that be, the state, are going to pick up and take over your creative power and turn it against you. Yeah. That's what's happening in the waking dream. And that's reflecting back to us. We, to the extent that any of us, and particularly when one person connects with their creative agency and connects with other people who are also in connection with their creative power, and they connect with other people, that's where we can get in sync and in phase with each other in a way where we can really, that's when all bets are off. That's when we can change the dream, the waking dream. Yeah.
And that's the cure right there, because it's very tricky in this day and age. And I'm also navigating. Sometimes I can fall into my own, externalizing everything, and we need to kill all the psychopaths. God damn it! What's what I mean? Like this,
me too,
just
totally.
It's like I feel my wife. She made a meme like at one point is like being upset and let's start a revolution and get rid of all the the elite and whatnot. And then the other side of me, everything is happening as it's supposed to be in light of the evolution of consciousness we all want, right? Which is true from the higher perspective. But the key point is, what's interesting, we also this program of the victim blame is happening. We also being disempowered and putting into this victim stance that something or somebody's doing something to us, right? That in itself is very disempowering, because as you said, rightly so, we need to step up to be creative, to build something new, to have a new vision, to create something new. So it's kind of like two ways. So at some point we don't want to ignore evil. We need to become aware of it, face it, but similar like Sri Aurobindo said, become aware of the occult forces, but don't dwell on it. Don't give it too much importance. Know their modus operandi, their game, to use it for your own spiritual development, to make the darkness conscious within yourself, but don't dwell on it. And I see too many people, I think that's what's happening a lot. I see in people, especially just waking up and are not engaged in any sincere inner work, they've easily fall into, and that's Wetiko working itself. They focus on evil, but then they get lost on it. They fall into doom and gloom and hopelessness, and oh my God, and project all these worst case doom and gloom scenarios into the future, which is only works for Wetiko, right?
Yeah. Then they're a minion for Wetiko if they fall into that pessimistic point of view or the despair or the depression, because they're not realizing their own incredible power. So if they're holding a pessimistic point of view, by being a dream, this being the dream, the universe is going to offer them all the evidence to confirm their pessimism, which makes them even more fixed in their pessimism. There's that feedback loop where then they will create the very world which confirms the objective truth of their pessimism. And, another way of saying that is, they've unwittingly become an instrument for Wetiko, And what you're saying, I just want to, it's so important that, we don't want to become overly sort of spending too much time contemplating evil or fascinated by it. Not at all, because that's actually to be feeding it, or to be reacting against it, thinking we're fighting it in a certain way because it feeds off of polarization.
Right.
But when we actually see its game, like you were saying, and see how it works, and then we realize as sovereign beings, we get to choose how we place our attention. and we can actually then invest our attention in creating the world we want to live in, that perspective, that vaporizes Wetiko.
Yeah. And I think that's what's happening in the world right now, the silver lining, because I see some sort of splitting happening, even in a natural way. There's much to be said about what I call level of being and soul individualization, and where everybody is at in their spiritual, quote, evolution, because with 7-8 billion people on the planet, yes, we are one, but we're not all the same. So everybody you can bring karma into it and all of that. Who knows about deeper soul lessons, right? But what I've seen, the silver lining, a lot of people started to question their lives, maybe like going back to Wetiko being the disease but the cure at the same time. It has broken down a lot of people lost their businesses and whatnot, but at the same time has helped many people, even though they lost things, help to actualize themselves. And, in the sense of right. Now I'm okay, now I'm questioning my life. Now I'm taking my life into my own hands, self-responsibility, go on a new path and really, become decentralized more, create community, create a new system. So I think that's really the silver lining in a sense.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly right. Because one way, you see, there are all these ways of describing Watiko, and one way is that it's a misidentification of who we think we are. If we're identified with a separate self, then we're under, and so many people are, and then we're reinforcing it on each other. That's to be under the thrall of Wetiko. So what you're pointing at is, with the pandemic, the silver lining is that, there are more and more people who are having the recognition that we don't actually exist as a separate self, but we're actually interconnected, interdependent with each other. And that's to potentially have this expansion of identity, to actually see, oh, wow, who I am is not just this limited ego, but actually is way, bigger. Yeah. And not separate from other people. And then the energetic expression of that realization is compassion. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of gifts, and all of that was potentially because of Wetiko, So that's what I'm pointing at when I say that, encoded in the disease, and it's an archetypal idea, that encoded in the poison is the medicine. Right. And, for example, if Wetiko didn't exist, we'd have to invent it. It's necessary. It's helping us. It's catalyzing the evolution of our species. Yeah. But if we don't have the recognition of what it's actually, revealing to us, it will kill us. Yeah. Okay. So that's the thing. It's it's really forcing us to have a recognition of something in ourselves. Yes. So the thing about Wetiko, think about it like a dream. It's this dreamed up phenomena. We collectively have dreamed up the Wetiko psychic epidemic that's playing out and informing all of the insanity that's playing out in the world, but it's actually revealing something to us. Yeah. And that's my whole work right there. And as people more and more have the recognition of the revelatory aspect, that it's a revelation. Wetiko is it's a sacred revelation, but in the form that it's totally not. That's the trip. Yeah. And so that's my whole work, is trying to really introduce people to that.
Exactly. And it reminds me, just what you just said, it reminds me, I think you mentioned it maybe even in the book, because you have a whole section in your new book on Sri Aurobindo and the hostile forces. And the mother, his partner, said something about the hostile forces. They had their rightful existence. They have the right to exist in light of the evolution of consciousness. And they have the right, they only can get to you again where you give entry points. So there's the teaching function, right? She even said they test the sincerity they test your sincerity, basically. That's what it comes down to.
Right. No, that's exactly right. And not just your sincerity, but also that we have this endowment, this divine endowment, and they want to make sure that we make the best use of it. That, exactly. And the thing about Wetiko, unlike, say the coronavirus, and we'll develop, whatever, some sort of medicine or vaccine, and it might mutate. Well, the Wetiko virus, it forces us to mutate. Mm-hmm. In other words, that's what I mean, that it's catalyzing our evolution,
So on that note, because you have in this book, in your new book coming up, I read halfway through it, but there's at the end a section on the coronavirus and the Wetiko virus. So kind of I'm really interested in your perception on it, because you mentioned like that COVID-19 is basically a symbol of a much deeper infection, which I definitely agree with. So how can we look at this whole pandemic?
That is such a trip, because the fact that this virus idea has come so into consciousness in the last year.
Yeah.
And so what I'm pointing at is that the coronavirus is like, think of it like this lower level emanation of the higher dimensional Wetiko mind virus. Mm-hmm. And like one way to understand it, the coronavirus is not just physical. It's not just like a biological entity. It has all these dimensions to it. Because think about it, it comes into our world. And who knows, we're not even going to get into whether it was created in a lab or whatever. It doesn't make a difference from one point of view, from what I'm pointing at. But it actually it shuts down economies. It changes people's behavior. Oh, we wear masks, we socially distance. People start dreaming about it. People get depressed. People are afraid. That's all of the subtle body of the coronavirus. That's not separate from the coronavirus. The coronavirus is not just physical. It has these multiple channels of operations in our minds. It affects our behavior. It affects our government, our political system. It affects everything. It affects what we do day to day in our lives over the last however many, over a year. And the point is that when you have that realization, you discover that all of those changes in behavior, whether it's, with new laws or, we can't congregate in large, or we have to wear a certain thing or not wear a certain thing, or get a vaccine or not get a vaccine, all of that goes through the psyche. In other words, the psyche is at the root of how this coronavirus, which is not just physical, but has multiple channels of operation, how it actually impacts on us and on the world is, getting channeled and expressed through the human psyche. The human psyche is the arena of Watiko. Mm-hmm. And so the point is that, you see, one of the things that I mentioned earlier in our talk today was that the Watiko virus, that it's actually or like one way, I think what I said is a way of seeing the Wetiko virus is to recognize the dreamlike nature. Well, the thing about it is that the Wetiko like psychosis is actually showing us the dreamlike nature. Like people over the pandemic have been walking around going, oh, it's surreal. This is so surreal. Yeah, it's easier to recognize the dreamlike nature. That's one of the gifts of the coronavirus, And so the point is that when you actually see the dreamlike nature, you see this universe is quantum in nature, and in a quantum universe, there's no separate parts. There's not separate parts interacting. No, it's all one. And so what I'm pointing at is that into the waking dream comes the coronavirus, and think about all the effects like I've been describing. All of those are not separate, and what you begin to understand when you recognize this as a quantum world, and this is like very, like a dream, is that there's no difference between the physical reality and our consciousness. That's what quantum physics has discovered. I wrote a book about quantum physics where I'm basically saying it's empirically showing us, it's proven that we're having a collective dream. And in a dream, there's no like physical reality separate from mind. No, they're indistinguishable, Yeah. And so, I mean, we're actually beginning to go down this rabbit hole where it's what I mean when I say Wetiko is a psychedelic, because when you begin to actually see Wetiko in a certain way and what it's actually telling us, all of a sudden it's like then the psychedelic takes effect and you have an incredible expansion of consciousness, and it unlocks this incredible creative energy. Yeah. That's our nature.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. So that really reminds me, going back to the coronavirus, COVID-19. And there's many things, like you said, who knows? It's a bioweapon now. Is it real, natural? There's even talk about questioning germ theory versus terrain theory. It's actually a real virus to begin with. We can go back to questioning all of modern medicine. But the key point, what you bring it to the next level, to not just look at it materially, but from a quantum, metaphysical, multidimensional level. Because regardless of what the truth on a material level is, a virus, yes or no, bioweapon, yes or no, this idea has been implanted into into us, right? By the powers that be, and fear frequency and propaganda. So a lot of it, I feel, even there may be a quote unquote, who knows about the statistics and the PCR tests, and there's a lot of things to be questioned, and all of a sudden the flu is not here anymore. But, I've made that case even a year ago when I wrote an article, also quoting Sri Aurobindo and others from the metaphysical aspect, the forces of illness, that we create the illness. We feed it through this, dreamlike nature, right? Of, we can literally create disease in that sense, of believing in it, of giving it more power, of feeding into the fear frequency, right?
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. I mean, if we're afraid, because Wetiko feeds off of fear. Yeah. And if we're afraid of Wetiko, then we're investing it with power over us. Yeah. So all of this, you see what's playing out, because in my work, I continually point at to contemplate this as a dream, and then to interpret it from the symbolic, point of view, because, the symbols are the language of dreaming. Yeah. And, all of what's playing out is actually completely 100% reflecting back to us our incredible creative power. That, if we're identified, like I was saying before, with a separate self, or out of fear, or we become entranced by this as objective, and we're just passive observers who are helpless, and just, we're just like the witnesses as compared to active participants who are creating it. Whatever the point of view we have about the nature of the world and our place in it and who we are, that instantaneously gets reflected back by the power of our dreaming. Mm-hmm. And that's what that's what we're unconscious of. And that's what I'm pointing out. That's what the coronavirus, that's what all the fascist forces, the powers that be, or when you actually have the realization, that's what all of them, when you interpret it like a dream, you see, oh, that's what they're reflecting. They're all expressions and reflecting back to us our unconscious, divine, creative power. Yeah. And to the extent we don't know it, we're going to dream up a world like we're in. Exactly. But then, just like a recurring dream, if we don't get the message, then the recurring dream happens in more and more amplified form and more of a nightmare until we actually awaken and get what the message is. That's the nature of our situation right now. Yeah.
Yeah. That reminds me also of another great analogy you made in the new book, the vampire analogy to Wetiko. And I want to just quote another expert from your upcoming book. We become susceptible to falling under the spell of a vampire when we turn a blind eye towards our own darkness, which renders our shadow invisible to us. We can recognize a vampire if we haven't shed light on our own darkness. Our unilluminated darkness means there's part of us that lives in darkness just like the vampire. The part of us that's just like the vampire can't see its own reflection, just like a vampire casts no reflection in the mirror, which is why we aren't able to more easily recognize the vampiric aspect of Wetiko. The speck of our own shadow gets in the way of our ability to see Wetiko, in addition to obscuring our light. So we, like you mentioned, we get caught up in almost like a time loop, so to speak, right?
Yeah. And the vampire thing, I mean, I know that one really well, because when I said, earlier today, I had a direct encounter with archetypal evil. I mean, it was like a vampiric figure, that destroyed my family, that almost killed me, but it actually was my, like this initiation. But the thing about a vampire, when you think about it, it has no independent existence. It doesn't have life on its own side. It needs to feed off of like this living creature, right? So in a way, it's like death taking on life, and it appears as if it's alive. But the point is that that's a description of Watiko, that, it's like a parasite. And if you think about it, like a parasite gets in us, or like a tapeworm would be another example. The tapeworm secretes chemicals in our brain that we start, I want to eat this food, and we start actually feeding the tapeworm, and it grows bigger. And all the while we think we're feeding our own appetite, but we're actually feeding this entity that's in us, and it grows bigger and bigger until it kills us. But does not want to do is kill us too soon, right? Because then it would suffer the inconvenience of having to find a new host.
Yeah.
So what I'm describing, whether it's a tapeworm, a parasite, a mind virus, or the vampire, all of those are pointing at, all mythologies and fairy tales, when, they are pointing at this sort of like dynamic, that's Watiko. And, and so then, the question of how do you really kill that vampire or free yourself from that energy, and in a way that's what, and it has to do with you stop feeding it and you start feeding yourself,
right.
And then it has no food.
Yeah.
And then
you starve it. Exactly. It's very interesting what you mentioned. I want to go deeper into that in the second hour. You had, with the food analogy, you think these are your desires, your wants, your needs, right? But it's infused by the parasite. Similar nowadays, there are certain ideologies and beliefs and ideas people are infected with and become very self-righteous about, and they think this is the right thing, this is my own thing, but they have been inserted externally by this psychosis, Wetiko mind virus, right? And then they become the servants for that.
That's exactly right. I see that, I'm sure we both see that. It's so, it's all over the place. People, there'll be an idea, there'll be a particular point of view, and they'll just attach to it, or it'll attach to them, and then they'll become identified with it. Yeah. And then they'll have this righteous point of view that they're in possession of the truth. And without having any awareness that they are just an instrument for maybe some other energy that's not them. And they're just being, it's like a puppet on a string. They're just being controlled and manipulated in that way. And you see, it's because of that, to reflect back to them, their state, the nature of what they've fallen into, that's where there's such an edge. Because if they had the courage to see the depth of darkness that they had unwittingly fallen into with the best of intentions, thinking they're helping people, it would be so traumatizing for them. That's the trauma that I was talking about, that there's a counter incentive that's built into that process where they'd rather not self-reflectively become aware of that, but yet they just double down. And that's what we see. And when people like that, and particularly when they connect with each other, then there's the collective psychosis. Because they create like this impenetrable, like sort of like energy field around them.
It's like a group entity, literally.
Like what?
Like a group entity, with tentacles.
Yeah. It's like a group entity, right? And any reflection of their insanity or their unconsciousness gets repelled or gets turned to confirm their viewpoint in a perverse way. So there's no getting in with evidence or facts or anything like that. And that's what I'm describing. That's a collective psychosis. Yeah. And that's a way of describing like what's happening to our species.
The collective psychosis by these Wetiko infected groups and whatnot is almost, you can link it to narcissistic abuse or gaslighting and all of that, right? Because you're being felt mad that something is wrong with you, right? And put the doubt back to yourself. But, at the end of the first hour, so before we close off, I'd like to maybe also for our listeners who may be struggling with what's happening in the world right now, and in light of the Wetiko topic, and we understand the premise is really like also recognizing the dreamlike nature of our reality, to understand, that everything is interrelated. And number two, that the darkness outside is a reflection of our own unrecognized darkness within. That's where Jungian psychology comes in, basic shadow work and all of that. But I know you work with a lot of people one-on-one and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So do you have any, just especially this day and age when right now, some practical advice for our listeners, how to deal with Wetiko and the darkness in the world and within their own psyche? Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. And what comes up in the moment when you asked me that was to connect with our creative spirit. Mm-hmm. To the extent, you see, the thing about Watiko, it actually, tries to kill our creative impulse. But you see, the thing about Watiko, it when you're in a field where Watiko is really palpable, all of a sudden you realize, I can't really, it's not safe for me to speak. I have to self-censor. There's like censorship in the field, and I don't feel, safe to just fully express myself. So then I have to edit. Well, all of that's feeding Watiko. The point is that Watiko tries to shut down our self-expression, but it also spurs it. It also potentially ignites it. So if we're able to take in because we're all like these healers in training, like shamans in training. If we're able to take in the incredible, the shadow that's in the field, and yeah, it's non-local. We see it out there, it's reflecting something in us, but when we see it out there, it's going to trigger something in us. And then what do we do with, being affected in that way by being triggered? Do we dissociate? Do we identify with it? Do we shut down? Do we compartmentalize it? Or are we able to carry that trigger in a way where we actually get creative? And that's being an alchemist, that's being a shaman, because a shaman is an artist. And that's the way of, the best way. What I get to, basically everybody I work with, I try to really get to that place to see what story have they internalized that's stopping them from expressing themselves creatively. Because I know for me, if I didn't connect, after I had my direct close encounter with Wetiko, and it so unbelievably traumatized me, and I mean, I was in real trouble. But I'm thankful that I was able to carry it in a way where it helped me discover my work, and it connected me with, my nature as a creative being. And that's all of our nature. So the thing is, when we actually really connect with being creative, which is our nature, then Wetiko has no power over us.
Yeah. Taking the power back over our own creativity. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And it's fascinating what you just said. It just reminded me when you said self-censorship, because so true. I see so many people, also the people I work with, or Laura and I in our online courses and whatnot, are afraid of speaking out. They have this fear of like attack of others, the mob, and being put down. And almost like the way you describe with the dreamlike nature, which we see big tech censorship and more censorship, thought control. It's almost a reflection of our own unconscious fear to speak up in a weird sense, the self-censorship, right?
Right, exactly. And then when it shows up, when we live in a world where there's all this censorship, and if you step out of the narrative that's being, presented by the mainstream, you just get attack pieces coming at you. What happens, we internalize that control system in our mind. Right. So it's not just something happening, in our society, but then unconsciously, to the extent that we internalize that in our mind, we then preemptively shut our own self-expression down before we even say anything. And then it gets rendered unconscious. Yeah. And then it becomes chronic. And then we don't even know we're doing it. And that's when then we've been vanquished. Then Wetiko has a field day.
Exactly. And then the shadow grows deeper, the unconscious.
Yeah. And exactly.
Yeah. Amazing, Paul. Wow. So let's dive deeper into the second hour after the break. And but before we close off here, again, where can people reach you? Your website, awakeninthedream.com, correct?
Right. Awakeninthedream.com. And there's just a ton of articles, all for free, a lot of interviews, all for free. You can, if you want to talk to me personally, you can book a session or buy my books, but it's not monetized at all. It's just like, I just want to get this information out because it's so helpful. And plus, if you go to the website, you can email me, and then that'll be a way if you want to contact me, for sure.
Yeah, and your book, the follow-up, the Wetiko, Healing the Mind Virus That Plagues Our World, is coming up this fall, you say?
Yeah, it'll be out this fall. And I just handed in the final edit, so that's the last thing I have to do before I see the book.
Yeah.
And the thing which is crazy is that, I mean, it's the time. Like when I first wrote The Spelling Wetiko, I knew I was plugging into something, but it took the world a couple of years to catch up. And it's funny because now every check I get, it's going up, and it's been out 8.5 years. And typically a book after 8.5 years stops selling. And so what I'm saying is that it's the time to understand this, that this is it's the topic of topics. That's what Castaneda, Don Juan, his teacher, says. And it so maps on and helps to understand, not only what's going on in our world, but also our own inner reactions, because it's non-local, Wetiko. It's not just talking about something out there or in there. It's talking about the interface between the two.
Exactly. Yeah, as I said, I don't say that lightly, but it's been steadily in my top 5 most recommended books. Dispelling Wetiko, Breaking the Curse of Evil, and it's a very important topic. So anybody who has not heard of it yet, not read it, please look into Paul's work, get his book, get this upcoming book. And we'll see you shortly in the second hour. It's available for members. If you're not a member yet, you can sign up at veilofreality.com. Also, a little reminder, we have our next Embodied Soul Awakening course coming up in August, and you can apply for that as well. It's only limited to 25 people, where we go deeper into this kind of work, interpersonal work, to really, help heal the world and ourselves and step more into our creative potential. That's, I think, the big giveaway, to really bring back our own creativity. Thank you so much, Paul.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you. Really.
And we'll be right back.
Okay.